So let's talk about buying a car. There are three ways to buy a car. One, I could borrow the cash. I could borrow money to buy the car. My very first car I bought in America, I paid cash for it because I'm like, I didn't even understand credit and borrowing money. I didn't even understand that. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to save the money. I'm going to pay cash. So I paid cash for the car. A year or two after having the car, I got into a car accident. This guy runs the red light, and I hit his car. He was drunk, runs the red light, I hit his car, and boom, my car gets totaled. Well, luckily for me, or unluckily for me in this situation, the guy did not have any car insurance. So my car gets totaled, he doesn't have car insurance, and I need a car. So I didn't have the cash now to go buy a new car, so I had to go and finance it. It's the first time I financed a car. So I go and borrow the money to go and pay for this car, right? Or the third way a person could use to buy a car is something called a private family bank. Remember, Rothschild, we're talking about how they established a bank. So I'm going to show you how to do that. First of all, let's explore what the difference of borrowing money for borrowing cash or paying cash for the car. So let's say over your lifetime, you're going to buy 11 cars. And let's say every 5 years, you're going to purchase a car. So you'll buy 11 cars over your lifetime. Now, if my average car costs $30,000, let's say. These are just basic numbers, just using it for math to keep the math simple. So $30,000, right? And then I paid 0% interest rate. Same 11 cars, every 5 years I'm buying a car. So you see the borrower who borrowed money because there was no interest paid $330,000. The cash buyer also paid $330,000. That's $30,000 per car, 11 cars, right? Now, let's factor in some interest. Let's say, because that's why the person pays cash. You're like, well, if I pay cash, I save on the interest. Well, let's look at that. So the borrower, the guy who borrowed money to buy his cars, if he's paying 5.5% interest rate every time he does that process, well, he would have spent $378,000. The cash buyer spent $330,000. So yes, obviously the guy who's not paying interest will spend less money than the guy who is paying interest. But what's the question nobody asks? How much money is the guy who financing it makes? So the bank over a period of time, over that lengthy period of time, will make $380,000 off of financing cars. So clearly the bank's putting up capital, and we're using their capital because we may not have money to pay cash for things. So whenever I want to buy something and I am borrowing to buy, here's what happens. I go into debt. So I go, boom, I borrow the money, go into debt. I borrowed $30,000 to buy a car. I spend the next 5 years paying it off, and I get back to zero. Then I go and buy another car again. I go into debt. Then I go and pay it off. I go into debt. I go and pay it off. That's the cycle. That's the cycle a lot of people are in America. They go into debt, and then they try to pay it off. They go into debt. They try to pay it off, right? But they end up back at zero, which means they owe nothing. Now, in order for me to pay cash, what do I have to do first? I've got to save the money. So I got to save this money. If I want to spend $30,000 or whatever is a car or whatever it is, I'm just using car as the example here. But I got to save this 30 grand. So I save this 30 grand and I spend it. I go back to zero. I build it up again. I buy a car. I go back to zero. I build it up again. I buy a car. I go back to zero. Have you noticed that the guy who's paying cash and the guy who's financing, they all end up back at zero? I pay it off. I now owe nothing. I'm back at zero. I had all this money saved up. I spend it on the car. I'm back at zero. Now, what if there was a third way? What if I decided to build up my capital, but instead of spending it, I allowed it to keep building and I leverage it to buy my cars? Remember we talked about how if your money compounds over a long period of time, how much it goes up. So you see it starts to build up here. And what if every time I wanted to buy a car, instead of just taking the money out because it's earning me interest, I could leverage it to buy my cars and keep my money continually working for me without interruptions? That would be an ideal situation. That would be the ideal way to do it.